Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Tableau Tip Tuesday. Today, as the title suggests, we're going to be going over spark lines. Now, what is a spark line? A spark line could be considered almost a sibling to the common line chart, but rather than plotting on multiple lines or on a single set of axes, a spark line consists of one or more line charts stacked on top of each other. So the beauty of a spark line is it's going to allow us to visualize trends without having that be washed out by a large axis. So what do I mean by that? If I go ahead and edit this axis and we don't have each one of these line charts using an independent range, they're all going to share the same range, and therefore, anything with a below average amount of sales, such as apparently Myanmar, it's going to show up as basically just a flat line butted up against that zero line. So instead, we want to edit our axis to allow for an independent range so we can see that seasonality across these dates without taking into account the magnitude of the sales that went into that specific location. Great for things like, if you're tracking COVID hospitalizations, or if you worked in a production environment and you wanted to see how many items are coming off of specific lines. A lot of different use cases for these hospital vacancy rates. A lot of areas where it's useful, where just because a hospital may have 1,000 beds and another hospital may have only 10 beds, we want to see that as a percentage of the amount of beds that are available. So it makes it really easy to still spot those trends because they all have independent axes. All right, so enough about what a spark line is. Let's go ahead and build one out for ourselves here. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to take an order date here, and we're going to go with a continuous month. That's going to make up the time series for all of our lines here. If we wanted to, we could use a discrete month if we didn't want to see seasonality over year, but rather just seasonality in discrete buckets. We could do that, but we're going to go with a continuous month here. Next, we're going to go ahead and place our state down in our rows shelf here, and then we just need a metric going through. So now we have a time series for each of the different states. Now, just to make this a little bit more concise, let's go ahead and we'll filter this to just the United States. There's no use for this other than just making it more of a manageable view, less cumbersome here. And there we go. Now we can see places like Montana who still have sales, but it's just a relatively low amount of sales. The time series is showing it as basically a flat line along that zero axis. So we're going to right-click our axis and we will edit this. And we're going to say use independent axis ranges for each column or row. The entirety of a spark line basically boils down to this single option right here. All right, and there we go. Now we have a working spark line. Now, typically, you'd go ahead and you would hide your header since we're not so much worried about the magnitude of the sales as we've already suggested. And then one last thing I like to do usually to clean these up is I like to just get my last point highlighted so you can see the amount that went into that very last point. And we can do that with just a simple calculation. We'll go ahead and edit the calculation from previously. And essentially what this is saying is the last function right here, the only time it can ever equal zero is if it is the last data point. So if last equals 0, that means it is the last data point for that specific pane or state in this case. Then I want to return the sales. And if it's a null, obviously we want to account for that with the zero null function. And then we end that if statement. So this last sales is simply going to allow us to take just the last dot and highlight it. So if we go dual axis here with our last sales, we can now see that that blue dot doesn't exactly line up, and that's because we're not synchronizing here. We can synchronize to have that dot lining up exactly, and now we have a means of seeing what that very last order was, which can clue you in to a degree of that magnitude, because again, you can see the amount right there. 970 represented nearly the same as that 10 right there. We'll go ahead and we'll hide that header right there, and there you go. Now you can visualize independent time series on the same sheet, called a spark line. That's all we have for you this week. Join us next week for another tip.